The question oftentimes comes up, what can I as a parent do to help extend my child's literature education beyond what happens in the classroom? Here are a few suggestions on what you might consider doing at home with your student. First, talk about the stories that they're reading in school. Oftentimes, your student will be reading texts which are at or slightly beyond their reading level. What that means is that you as a parent have a great opportunity to ask them questions about the sorts of things that they're reading about in school. Keep in mind that your students may struggle to read these texts independently and by themselves. So any support that you're able to give as a parent is going to be beneficial to them. Start with asking them questions like, what happened in the story? Ask them to talk about some of the characters that they are introduced to. Ask questions to help them understand what they're reading. Help them get a better sense of what the narrative is in the story itself. Ask them questions like, what happened in your reading today? Or what happened next? When you ask these sorts of questions, you're encouraging your child to take a lot of information and try to boil it down to a couple of sentences and be able to articulate those sentences to you. This is an incredibly valuable skill for any reader, and don't limit questions to those about the narrative. Feel free to dive deeper. Ask them, what was the most surprising or exciting thing that happened? Why did that happen? Why did the character act in that particular way? When you ask those sorts of questions, you foster good conversation between you and your student. You want to make sure that they have the opportunity to enjoy the story as a whole. Great books should foster conversation, so feel free to focus on those things that your student found particularly interesting in the story that they just read. Secondly, encourage a habit of reading in the home. The first best way that you can do this is simply to read to your child. Oftentimes we assume that once a child turns 3 or 4 years old, we parents don't need to read to them anymore. But this can be a very valuable thing even for older students. First off, when you read stories to your students, you give them the advantage of hearing a more experienced reader read to them. This exposes them to vocabulary and to ideas which they might not have been exposed to otherwise. Great books of literature might intimidate them because they're more difficult to read. But that challenge is lessened when you are willing to read those kinds of stories to them. Audiobooks are a good option here too. So even if you don't have the opportunity to read to your child yourself, feel free to provide them with unabridged audiobooks at home that they might be able to enter into these stories. Also, get them reading. Keep in mind that the books that they read in school may be more advanced than the kinds of books that they can read comfortably. Feel free to let them read books which are more at their reading level or slightly below it. We don't want reading to become a chore. We want it to be something which the students enjoy. So it's okay if they're reading books which are a little bit less than what they typically see in the classroom. Additionally, make reading a part of your family culture. Set time aside in the day for your family to read together, whether everyone is reading the same book together or everyone is taking time to read their own individual books. Students who see that reading is something which is valued by their family are more likely to enjoy it themselves. In addition to reading to them or providing time for reading, dedicate portions of your house where your child will be more likely to read. A comfortable reading nook or something along those lines can be something which is very helpful in fostering their desire to read works of literature. Apart from reading books, what can our kids do? For younger students, consider having them draw illustrations of the scenes that you just read about together. As they draw these pictures, ask them questions about what they're drawing when they finished. Let this be an opportunity for them to retell scenes from the story that they found particularly memorable. Additionally, encourage your children to play act the stories that they read. I'll often hear stories from teachers about children who go to the playground and during their recess time are reenacting scenes from Robin Hood or King Arthur. While students have this natural propensity, encourage this sort of thing as well, and feel free to play act with them in order to help them better understand these stories. Finally, encourage them to memorize poetries and songs from the stories that they read. Whether it's The Wind in the Willows or Winnie the Pooh, if there's a passage that your child finds particularly memorable, feel free to encourage them to memorize and to sing those songs together with you. Remember, the important thing is that you're trying to encourage students who have a love for reading. With that end in mind, don't be afraid to enter into that experience with them.